Hello everyone. In this series of videos, we are going to be looking at roots. In this video in particular, I'm going to introduce to you what square roots are. So we're going to start by having a look at, well, what are square roots? And we'll see that it's going to be one symbol which kind of has two meanings. Then we will look at some examples of square roots. We will look at what happens with negative square roots or opposite square roots. And last but not least, we will discuss something about approximations and exact answers. As you see, there are a lot of topics that we're going to go through, so you might want to just look at one or two topics at a time and go back to it, to the other parts later. But first of all, what is a square root? And actually, before I get to the square root, I'm going to set up some other things. If you really want to skip that, you can go to the next timestamp or the next part in the video. But what I want to look at first is what kind of operations, what kind of calculations can we do with numbers? And technically we know three calculations. We can add two numbers, we can multiply two numbers, or we can do them to the power of something. Now you may say, well, no, we know more operations than that. Yes, that's because we also know opposites of these. The opposite of adding is subtracting. If I do +3 and -3, I get back to where I started. The opposite of multiply is divide. If I do ×5 and then divide by 5, I'm back where I start. I'm going to skip that next gap for a bit because there's one more column I want to mention, and that is a column called numbers. Because if I subtract too much, I get into a special type of number. If I have 3 minus 5, I get into negative numbers. Same idea if I divide too much, I get another special new type of number. If I divide 2 by 5, I get a fraction. And in fact, small side note, the divide symbol is already a fraction. It tells you to put a 2 at the dot above and the 5 at the dot below, for instance, to get 2/5. But that's a little side note. So at this point, with this setup, we're going to get to the square root because we have this gap right here. And this is where the square root is going to come up. So as an opposite of to the power of, and very specifically as an opposite to the power of 2, so as an opposite to squaring, we have the square root. So what that asks is, what did I put to the power of 2 to get, for instance, 4? That is what the square root of 4 asks. So the square root of 4 is 2. So the opposite of a square is the square root. However, sometimes, just like with the negative numbers and with the fractions, we can't get a normal number out of this. And what happens then is we just kind of keep the square root symbol. And we just say, well, square root of 5. So square root kind of has two meanings. It is an operation, it's something you calculate, but it can also be a number. And we will start by looking at it as an operation, as a calculation for a little bit. But most of this chapter, and especially paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, we will look at how we work with those new numbers, with those square roots. Okay, so we've got a basics of what square roots are. Let's look at a few more examples. So square root of 4 we just saw, that asks what to the power of 2 is 4. Alternatively, what sides does a square have with an area of 4? And that's 2, because 2 times 2 is 4. Same idea with square root of 16. What squared is 16? 4. Or square root 25. Something squared is 25, that's 5. And we can take even larger numbers, square root 144. Something times itself is 144. That number is 12. So those are just a few examples of square roots. Now, what happens when we have negative numbers with square roots? Now let's start with positive again to set up a base. What is the square root of 9? Well, something times something is 9. That is 3. 3 times itself is 9. But now, what about square root of minus 9? Well, if I try 3, well, we already know that 3 times 3 is 9, so no. But minus 3 then, well, minus 3 times minus 3, minus times minus is plus, that's also 9, so not that either. And we can try to fill this into our calculator, but if we do that, we get a math error. The math says this is not possible, and well, we see that already. So there is actually no square root of a negative number. A mathematician may say that it's actually 3i, but the I literally stands for imaginary, so you don't have to worry about that. Okay, so square root of a negative number doesn't exist. What about minus square root of 9 then? This does exist because we can just calculate square root 9, that is 3, and add a minus. And this is actually following the order of operations. You can also think of it like this. If you have a number line, then, well, square root 9 is over here, and putting a minus in front just makes us go to the opposite side. So it is just the opposite of square root 9. Then last but not least, we have to have a look at approximations and exact answers. And again, I'm going to start with this example of square root 9 is 3. And this is exactly true. It is precise, it's an exact answer. But let's have a look at a different example. Suppose we look at square root 2. Well, 1 times 1 is 1, 2 times 2 is 4. I cannot think of a whole number where this works. But we had just said that square roots are also numbers, so at least I can just answer square root 2, and that is an exact answer. But if I want to go a bit further, I might fill it into my calculator, which, side note, I do using this button if you have a Casio like I do. And I get 1.414213562, so maybe that is the number. But square root 2 must also be the number that if I do it to the power of 2, it gives exactly 2 again. So let's try that out. I type in 1.414213562 to the power of 2, and it turns out to not be exactly 2. So this number is not exactly square root 2. What happens is your calculator can only show 10 digits, so after those 10 digits, it has to round off. This number is rounded off. It is an approximation. It is close, but it is not precise. So we can say that square root 2 is approximately that number, or if we want to round off a shorter number, if we want to have an approximation to 2 decimals, that square root 2 is 1.41. And we say that it's approximate by using this squiggly equal sign. That is how we say this is not exactly the answer. So in conclusion, this is not precise, but they give us good approximations. And an exercise will tell you, do you need to give an exact answer or an approximation? So exact will either just be a square root, like square root 2, or if it gives a whole number like 3 or maybe 1.5, or close to a whole number, then that number will be your exact answer. If the screen of your calculator is completely filled, then you may assume that it's not going to be an exact answer and that you're going to have to round off to give an approximation. So that is all for now about square roots. I hope this gives you an idea of what the square root of a number is and how you can give an approximation of it. For now, let's get started on working with it, and in the next videos we will look further into how we calculate with those new strange numbers.